You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 284 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. On today's show, talking about the U.S. relationship with China, we have this major geopolitical event with the arrest of a Chinese executive in Canada. This is a Chinese telecommunication giant, 100,000+ employees. This is actually a female executive, Meng Wanzhou, who's arrested there. And, this is a big issue. It's impacting global markets. Of course, you have this pretty strained relationship between U.S. and China on the trade issue with, what has been called a trade war going on between the two countries. And then, of course, less covered but very important is the conflicts between the United States and China over claims to Taiwan and the South China Sea. I hope all of you who listen to the show could take the time to either recommend it to a friend or share the show on a social networking site. You can find the show best place online is the Libertarian Institute. There I publish my daily news roundup and the show, both featured on the homepage. And also take the time to check out my news website, immersionnews.com. And then for those of you who really want to support the show, patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. I do a little bit of bonus content. Just did a show with Patrick McFarlane and Keith Knight of the Liberty Weekly podcast, where we just kind of talk about some stuff libertarian mostly. So if you're interested in that, subscribe to the show. All right, here we go. The exec is arrested on the same day that Trump is meeting with Xi, the Chinese leader, at the G20. I don't think this is happening, I hope not, at least while, they're eating dinner or anything like that. Like the bombing in Syria took place as Trump was meeting Xi for the first time. This is, of course, back in 2016. But, this is, within 24 hours here of Trump making a deal with Xi to have this more or less cessation of economic hostilities between the two countries. They've, put several rounds of tariffs and other kinds of financial or economic restrictions on the opposing countries. And so, this 90-day truce, what they were calling it, which was going to be time for the United States and China to negotiate a trade deal. So big deal here, right? Because the current trend is more tariffs, more tariffs, more tariffs, more tariffs. And what they were going to say is that for the next 90 days, we're going to work on finding a solution. And so 90 days is a long period of time. I think there's a lot of work that could be done there. And even if you don't come to an overall conclusion here, even if you're that pessimistic about Trump, which I understand, after 90 days, I think, we could hope that, there's a good chance that at least some things are happening in positive direction to continue, the path now is that we're looking at removing a sanction here in exchange for them removing a sanction. A lot of observers are saying that this arrest puts that in jeopardy. I guess it's worth talking about the arrest itself. I believe exec is just changing planes in Canada when she was arrested. This was a planned thing. Apparently, Canada notified the U.S. Justice Department, and at one point in time, John Bolton was saying that he knew about the arrest prior to it. President Trump, by all accounts, did not know about the arrest, and it doesn't seem like anybody is coming out and saying that, yeah, he knew this was going to happen. There's interesting politics there, definitely. When you look at the fact that if John Bolton stonewalled this information from getting to the president, you certainly would hope that Trump is concerned about it. It makes him look like a liar. Although we've seen cases like what Nikki Haley has talked about in her interviews as she's leaving the UN, that her and Trump intentionally played up his kind of reckless persona at times in order to put the U.S. in more favorable position. So maybe that's what's going on here. Trump wants to be the, Don Boss mafioso kind of guy that sits there at dinner with his enemy and then is able to say, I just arrested one of your executives or something dark like that. And that it's a real power move to do something like that. And so maybe that's the role Donald Trump was trying to play here. Or maybe this is really John Bolton having, first of all, that much influence. And, we've talked about in the past on the show about this Wall Street Journal article where he's called the secret president, or President Bolton, ingest by some White House staffers because of the power and influence he has in the White House. Maybe if this is the case, hopefully Donald Trump would look at getting Bolton the hell out of there. So the actual arrest, I think, according to Canada, is for fraud/intellectual property theft. And so, you do have a really interesting issue here. And I guess I would love to hear like a couple like intelligent people debate this kind of thing, which is what to do if, you're in a country like Canada or the United States or other countries. And, you have these agreements where, there's intellectual property. If somebody comes up with an invention, then our governments all agree that we're going to enforce that guy owns that intellectual property. But here you have countries that exist outside of that kind of global order, and they want to produce, those products and, not pay any royalties or anything like that. Certainly there's like some interesting discussions to be had there. I think this is one of the things that kind of turned me against intellectual property, just for a little tangent there. But it seems to be enforceable and that, these people can and probably should be able to make these products. This became even more clear to me when I realized there were issues like medicines, right? And so these countries overseas are able to produce medicines that cost the United States in large part because of the regulations imposed on them by the FDA, but millions and millions of dollars from these U.S. companies to develop these drugs. And then, a country in, I think, Thailand or Indonesia was a pretty popular country to have this happen. They'll just start producing the drug, in their own country. And so it's an ability to produce really cheap medicine this way. Anyways, that's the Canadian claim. There's some speculation, I guess, that this could also be a case where it's going to be an extradition to the United States. There's, I guess, questions as if this company, Huawei, while I guess she would have been in the, responsible for it, was violating U.S. sanctions against Iran. I don't have a lot of sympathy, for arresting this woman over the sanctions. I guess I'm not aware of like the human rights record of this company or of her. I know there's some pretty dismal working conditions in part of China, and, there's still a lot of fascism in that country. And so, maybe she does mobilize the government in order to oppress her workers or something like that. I don't want to, make this woman out to be some kind of great victim who doesn't deserve to be arrested because I don't know her track record whatsoever. However, it does seem like, the arrest either by the American claim or the Canadian claim seems rather illegitimate. The larger problem here is that you have this kind of fragile relationship right now between the United States and China, where we had the potential to build this really great deal. And now, this has really thrown cold water on it. China is upset. And as I was probably explaining, rightfully so, over this arrest. It seems like a very unfair detention. There's also the issue. She was granted bail, which is good news. But that I guess this woman has some health conditions that are kind of complicated. So, she's worried about just being in a Canadian jail and all this kind of stuff. She does have a Canadian residence, and I guess that's where she's living at this time. And she has said that she will remain in Canada throughout the trial. We'll see if that actually happens. I mean, if she gets the opportunity to go to China, it seems pretty wise to me to take that chance. So now to tie it into the war stuff, we had the old saying where goods don't cross borders, armies will. Scott Horton always brings up the best proof of this, which is right at the beginning, I believe, of the Bush administration, a U.S. spy plane goes down in China, and the Wall Street guys put a lot of pressure on Colin Powell and the U.S. government to get this one right, to make sure they didn't destroy U.S. relationship with China. Now, I think one of the unfortunate things here is that Trump's very twisted version of, whatever America First really is, has led Trump to waging this trade war on China and in a lot of ways demonizing China. There are certainly, I think, some, claims and problems here where maybe China is not enforcing some of these copyright agreements or whatever, or trademark agreements that they would be under treaties with the United States or something like that. I think there are cases where, maybe China is able, because of the large amount of America debt owned, to manipulate the U.S. currency. But these aren't reasons, to put tariffs on Chinese imports. It certainly doesn't help American consumers at all. And so, this has really damaged the trade relationship between the United States and China. And if we start seeing sanctions being placed on China, especially when we look at China doing business possibly in weapon sales with Russia or Iran, if that were to happen, the U.S. could look to sanction them and then, further prevent possible relationship with Chinese companies. And if we sever enough of the, kind of economic benefits between the two countries, the next time you have a crisis, there may not be that influence from the United States markets to pressure the, whatever administration it is, whether it's the Trump administration or Hillary Clinton wins in 2020 and, Hillary Clinton is now in charge of navigating and they say absolutely not, you can't escalate. Now, I think places of the most danger right now are around Taiwan, where under the Trump administration, I think this happened a few times under Obama too, we're sailing U.S. warships through the Taiwan Strait. China has what they call one China policy, believing that Taiwan is still part of the Chinese empire. And of course, I think there are a lot of places in China where the minority groups are definitely oppressed by the central government. And so while Taiwan is more or less an independent state with an independent government and independent people, China doesn't recognize that. And the United States, for what it's worth, recognizes that Taiwan is part of China as well. But anyways, we sail our ships through the Taiwan Strait here and, we kind of do under the sailing of our ships to the Taiwan Strait is a signal that we believe that these are not Chinese territorial waters, which means they're Taiwanese territorial waters. So China takes exception to this. There's also the South China Sea. China claims a string of islands way out in the sea. There's some reefs that they've turned into artificial islands, and they claim that this gives them the territorial rights to the South China Sea. Now, the U.S. says, no, we don't agree to this. And there are other countries in the region who also say that we don't agree to this, like Vietnam, the Philippines, and I believe Indonesia are the three countries that kind of come to mind to having big claims here. And so we sail our warships through here, and we've had a couple times where U.S. ships have gotten close to Chinese ships. And so what happens if a U.S. ship, maybe runs aground and then is surrounded by Chinese ships? And, a crew, then the U.S. has to, be put in a place of a confrontation here. How do we de-escalate that situation if we don't have these massive benefits coming through trade? And the overall importance here is that China is a real nuclear power state. And while they're not, quite the nuclear power that Russia is, and maybe the U.S. would win a nuclear war with China, it's not like it would really matter to any of us anyways, because that size of a nuclear war, we're pretty much talking extinction. All right, I'll probably keep updating this story as the news comes out, whether she's arrested, convicted, flees Canada, or is extradited to the United States. Lots of possibilities here, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting reading. I know Moon of Alabama has written on it, and a few more other pretty good analysts. Oh, and recommendation here, linked in the show notes page where I got most of my really good information, was a Ron Paul Liberty Report. Dan McAdams and Ron Paul, as usual, just knock it out of the park on the analysis here. We have more sanctions of North Korean leaders, 3 officials, one of these being a high advisor to Kim Jong-un. Bad news here, I think, every time you have these sanctions, for a couple of reasons. One is that when you sanction these people, it prevents them from ever traveling abroad because then nobody could buy them a hotel room or do anything because it's a violation of U.S. sanctions. And so it's a real diplomatic problem, especially when you have like advisors and stuff like that. Also, the issue here is that North Korea is pushing to get some sanctions relief. And this is, kind of going in the face of that. And also China, or even South Korea, is kind of looking at, I think, getting to the point where they would like some sanctions relief on North Korea to help continue to ease tensions there. But I think this is a signal it's going the other way. And, not like I think these are the kind of people that, should be allowed in polite society. And, for all I really care, nobody should do business with these people. But the problem is that they're in leadership positions in North Korea. And if we ever want to create a situation that's better for the Korean people, I think that's going to involve talking with these kind of guys to get them to, as Michael Malice would describe it, to release their hostages. The Philippines is going to end up buying 16 American-made helicopters. I do think there's an interesting story here about sanction. So originally, I believe these were going to be helicopters bought from Russia, but sanctions prevented that, and so they end up being bought from the United States. It'll, I guess, be interesting to see if any senator raises a stink about this one. The president of the Philippines, Duterte, is not widely thought of as a war criminal, but, he's waging this absolutely brutal drug war in his country. Of course, there was the ISIS occupation of a Philippine city, and there was some problems, as, any counterinsurgency there, some pretty nasty things going on in that liberation of that city. And, one thing that I think could help call into question weapon sales like this would be this new bill introduced in the House, and it's going to give the House oversight power on weapon sales as well. Really doesn't make sense to me why it's just the Senate that would get to do that, other than if they look at maybe under the treaty clause in the Constitution. But all the same, more oversight the better. This is really, I think, more than treaty war-making issues, right? We're giving away weapons of war to these countries, and I think all of Congress should be able to have a say. I think they should vote every time on the issue, but at the very least, I think any member of Congress should be able to force that vote, and so this is what this new bill would do. Probably won't pass. This game relatively little attention, but there's a couple of co-sponsors on it. In Palestine, a 4-year-old boy died of shrapnel wounds he received from a Israeli sniper bullet. These are the kind of things that happen all the time in Gaza, and they're so sad and they're so tragic. And they receive relatively little or no media attention. And when these kind of things are exposed, one of the viewpoints that's, kind of within the mainstream position is that, well, as unfortunate this is, his, family, relatives, brothers, or whatever were probably terrorists, and that's why this boy was shot, and what the sniper didn't do anything wrong. We have Iraq carrying out a couple airstrikes in eastern Syria. This has happened a few times. I haven't seen the Syrian government respond to any of these, but I'm kind of surprised, just because, this would be seemingly an unauthorized invasion of Syrian sovereignty, even though, the U.S. is already invading that sovereignty in that airspace there. Turkey has announced, the president there, Erdogan, has announced a invasion of Syrian Kurdistan. This includes areas east of the Euphrates River. Throughout the Syrian civil war, Turkey has complained of the rising autonomy and size of territory held by the Syrian Kurds and their YPG militia. Initially, they put their red line at the Syrian Kurds crossing the Euphrates River. They did this taking Manbij and almost all the way out west to Al-Baib. But they've been turned back and through negotiations with the American government have withdrawn at least back to Manbij. Turkey claims Manbij, a city that lies on the west side of the Euphrates River, is still held by Syrian Kurds. The U.S. disputes this and say they fulfilled their agreement here. I'm not sure what the actual facts on the ground there are. In northern Syria, on the border along the east of the Euphrates River there, the border between Turkey and Syria, we've had some shelling by the Turkish military into Syria, but now Erdogan says he's going to invade. This would be the third Turkish invasion of Syria, the first being Operation Euphrates Shield, which I believe still could, has about 20,000 or so Syrian militants within the ranks there, and they're kind of called the Euphrates Shield Forces there in northern Syria. I think mostly in the northern Aleppo province. And then, of course, you had Operation Olive Branch, where the Turkish military and then some militants, including jihadist types, rolled into the Afrin province of northern Syria there and took Kurdish territory in the Kurdish enclave, pretty much all the way down to Syrian government-held territory near Aleppo. I'm sure the U.S. is going to push back against this. We still haven't defeated ISIS along the southern part of the Euphrates Valley in Syria near the Iraqi border in southeastern Syria, but the more Turkey continues to push and try to invade Syria, the more it's going to take the YPG attention away from ISIS, and maybe this could allow ISIS leaders to escape or cause the U.S. and their coalition to rely more heavily on air power and possibly producing more civilian casualties. As far as it goes, the Kurds aren't doing particularly well in the fight against ISIS there in southeastern Syria. They've relied more and more heavily on U.S. airstrikes. They've not really gained any territory, I believe, since like May or June. ISIS has taken some, and then they've been able to take some back. But the overall size of that little enclave of ISIS there isn't very big anymore. The SDF, or the YPG, the Syrian Kurds, have another problem in Syria, of course, and that is they hold about 1,700 foreign women and children that are the relatives, I think mostly husbands and children, of Islamic State fighters. Some of these women and children are radicalized themselves. And then they hold about an additional 550 foreign fighters, who are actually like ISIS guys that have been captured. The host governments are refusing to take these people back into their countries. And so the Syrian Kurds are kind of sitting on them with not knowing what to do. One potential problem would be shipping them to Iraq, where I think, pretty much kangaroo courts going on there, convicting and hanging people for being associated with ISIS, including women. I want to talk about a couple world leaders who I don't mention very often on the show. Imran Khan, of the Prime Minister of Pakistan now, made a statement recently that Pakistan was no longer going to be the hired government of the United States. And I think this mostly applies to not only the U.S. terror war in Afghanistan, but also the U.S. war against the Taliban in Afghanistan, and the U.S. war against the Taliban and the Islamic jihadists in Pakistan as well. Because, certainly even Trump has carried out at least one drone strike in Pakistan. Khan also expelled 18 what he called like kind of Western NGOs from his country, saying that they were, influencing, trying to wage influence and stuff like this. I think we're going to see this more and more. And I've actually seen it from the leader that I'm talking about next, Maduro of Venezuela, where they've kind of recognized that having these NGOs in your country is dangerous, because this is how the West peddles kind of these non-military based coups against your government, like we saw in Ukraine. Maduro has accused the United States of being behind an assassination plot. I believe he's referring to the drone plot, where somebody tried to fly a couple of explosive drones at him. He survived that, and I guess the problem here, and the point I wanted to make, isn't so much that I think there's any proof that the United States did this, and I really have no idea, but that it's pretty believable given the United States track record and the fact that John Bolton put him in like kind of the evil Latin America triad, or whatever he called it, the troika of tyranny, that there's, I'm sure, a real reason that the people of Venezuela probably believe Maduro when he says that. The circumstantial evidence against the United States isn't good, and that's a real problem with the U.S. global image. All right, stories about Africa. Just some stuff over the past couple of weeks that I think are worth noting. A Green Beret in Africa was allegedly, I think he was in Niger, driving drunk and wrecked, killing his passenger, which was a French soldier. Maybe this will gain some international attention. There's a lot of French nationalism going on in these yellow vest protests. Certainly, I think Macron will have to demand something be done here. If, it turns out that, this French soldier was kind of the victim of a poor choice by the American soldier. We also have an article out in the New York Times, pretty interesting. General Mattis was apparently very upset over what happened with the kind of fallout from the Niger mission that ended up with 4 Americans being killed in October of 2016. Initially, like mostly lower level guys just got reprimanded for it. He apparently lost it and was like, no, this is absolutely unacceptable. Now he didn't go all the way up the chain of command and, feel so bad that either he didn't know what was going on there, or, he put the wrong people in the wrong positions that led to this thing happening. Or, AFRICOM, high ranking people there getting removed for it. But some higher level officers have now taken the fall. The ISIS guys in Somalia are apparently waging a war against the Al-Shabaab guys in Somalia. Further proof that the United States really shouldn't be complicating itself in these matters and just staying out of it. And, let all these thugs kill each other off if all these really terrible people are going to exist in the world, absence of U.S. interests, rather than trying to constantly influence and just kill the right people. The Ebola outbreak in the Congo is raging on. Definitely an important issue to be aware of, just because, the problem you have here is there's fighting going on in the region. And then, you continue to have kind of the cultural problems of people not following the best practices of dealing with an Ebola outbreak as far as, kind of sanitation and making sure it doesn't spread. In a very complicated situation, we're getting the Ebola close to these large kind of cities, 1 million people in some of them, and a shortage of vaccines. So you have like 1 million people in the city and like 300,000 vaccines. It's a very worrying situation. All right. That's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. I'm sure on Monday's show, I'll be talking about Yemen. We have that vote for SJ Res 54, should be happening today. So probably just Google that up over the weekend and see what happened there. But I'll give my analysis on Monday. Thank you all for listening to the show. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org, patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus, immersionnews.com, minds.com/immersionnews, and then at KYAAALE on Twitter.